Ladies, gentlemen of the MCU, just got back quite literally about 5 seconds ago from watching Loki Season 2, Episode 6, the finale titled Glorious Purpose. And I have to say, man, I really enjoyed that finale. I've got quite a lot to say about it. So as usual, guys, we're going to go through the recap, the breakdown, and the overall thoughts, my review on what happened during the events of this episode. But then I'm also going to tangle in some speculation in there, some theory time, because, you know, given the way things ended off and what this means for the larger just MCU. I know I said that last week, but truly, this ended in a way that a lot of us somewhat thought it would with regards to Loki Who Remains, you can say, but there's still lots of things to contemplate with just exactly how things went down. And I would love to get you guys involved down in the comments below, as usual. Like this video if you do, and only if you do go on to enjoy it. Dislike it if you want to, and consider subscribing for more Marvel coverage just like this. And one thing I just want to say that this opening scene gave me, you know, where we pick up with the episode of just the camera coming out of that temporal loom, the soundtrack, it's just this epic start, if you will. I just love the imagination of this show. And this is what I mean by when I say I kind of feel like it's a big shame that not more people are watching it compared to season 1. And I do get that without me going on a massive tangent about, I guess, you know, how some people say the MCU has fallen off, or just the idea of another discussion with superhero fatigue or whatever it is. I do get the argument of both sides there, but I don't feel like Loki is one of them. I've got friends as well who enjoyed Loki season 1, and they're like, I'm just not so bothered about season 2. And then I see this opening, the soundtrack kicking in, a week has gone by since the last episode, and I'm like, yeah. But let's carry on without getting too distracted here. We have Victor Timely going to suit up, considering that Loki has time slipped back to where he was. And unfortunately, this is where we see Victor Timely spaghettify again. And after speaking to OB, Loki realizes it's because they've just taken too long to be able to tackle what they were trying to do. So this is where we get into a bit of a Groundhog Day with Loki, time slipping again and again, learning things more and more along the way. And I have to say, I did feel bad for Victor Timely. We'll talk about this a little bit later, I suppose, with the way the episode closed things off. But speaking of Victor Timely, this is where Loki introduces him to OB. Even earlier on, he's going through the plan, using OB's model. Everyone just keeps looking at Loki like, what the heck is going on? And this is where Loki asks something that I was like, are they really going to do this? He asked OB how long it would take to know everything that he knows about mechanics, physics, engineering, and OB said it would take decades, and then Victor Timely said, well, you know, really centuries. And, you know, technically I thought for a second, well, wouldn't it take decades? But the reason why centuries apply is because, after all, OB did say to Mobius, like, earlier on in the season, it's been like 400 years since he saw Mobius last. So, yeah, I kind of forgot in that moment. I was like, oh yeah, OB has got a wealth of knowledge that goes across centuries. So that is why we cut to the title card of Centuries Later. And, you know, I do like moments like this. I get the kind of comic book panel fun of that, but I was just thinking that is mental, like, to do so quickly. I know you're not meant to think too deeply about it. I'm willing to bet 3/4 of people don't, but you probably had Loki just go back into different periods of time, studying, maybe from OB himself or whatever, for centuries, year after year, like week after week, day after day, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, century after century, to learn everything he did to get his own version of the throughput multiplier that didn't even end up working. It's just kind of insane. So now it is time for Victor poor Victor to go out there again. And to mention it again, I did like the somewhat severity, the high stakes that they had at the beginning of this episode, but clearly with the comedic overlapping of scenes where you had Loki just giving the words of encouragement to Victor as he like painstakingly takes step after step after step. And at this point, I was like, oh, okay, you know, he hit the green button, the throughput multiplier launches into the loom, and Loki tells him to come back. And I don't know about you guys, but I feel like a lot of us were probably expecting in this moment, you could kind of tell they're just going to have Victor Timely just, I don't know, spaghettify again. But then they subverted my expectation here, and he was alive. And I was like, okay, Loki seems very elated. Now, don't get me wrong, I still had the sense that, okay, this obviously isn't going to work out the way that they want it to. But I did think that Victor Timely would be, once again, a bowl of spaghetti. But it didn't turn out to be the case. And things did go awry in an explanation of where I thought, I'm not going to lie, with how much knowledge that Casey, let alone OB, has, out of all the people in the room, what they learn is that after, OB says that the readings are off, that the loom is overloading again, Victor explains something that I felt should have occurred to these characters already. So they're trying to create a device to launch out into the loom to obviously stabilize the branches, right? And it just occurs to Victor and everyone else in this moment through him saying this, that there are just too many branches for the multiplier to handle. Because these branches, given that they're not pruning timelines anymore, are expanding at an infinite rate. And so therefore it's a scaling problem that you can't really account for, because if multiple branches and, in the multiverse are just continuously growing, you would need this ever-evolving and adapting throughput multiplier, which they just can't do because it's infinitely expanding. You can't create an infinitely expanding throughput multiplier. And I just thought, again, I'm not trying to really nitpick here, but I just thought that we kind of knew this. If branches weren't being pruned, then branches are just got to keep branching, aren't they? So I just kind of felt like, why has nobody thought of this problem? I don't know, am I going crazy? I just feel like that should have occurred to these smart-ass people in the first place. They're literally called the Time Variance Authority. And that's when Loki's like, well, God, I've spent centuries and centuries trying to come up with it. And again, I need to remind you, think about it for 3 seconds. It's insane for all of that effort to amount to something that kind of should have really occurred to them in the first place. That couldn't really be contained. But fair enough, I enjoyed, the Groundhog Day there. So he's like, okay, I need to go back to the guy, he who remains. And the last time we can do that is to go back to where Sylvie was about to kill him. So I really enjoyed this part of the episode because this is something I was anticipating. We kind of got clues of this in the trailers for those of you who picked up on that. And I did find it hilarious that when he slipped back into himself, he just changed attitude and immediately kind of tackled Sylvie because he knew what she was going to do. And yeah, this, of course, no matter how many times he tried to talk down Sylvie, if there's one thing that we know about a character, she is very bullheaded. I get it because of her backstory, but even in this season, it was a big challenge to get her to kind of see past melting down the TVA when Loki tried to point out to her that they were potentially, at that point in time, to their knowledge, the only thing that could prevent the temporal loom from melting down. Basically this whole season-long story arc. So this is where Loki kind of gets sick of it and says to He Who Remains, why'd you never try to stop her? Fight back. Do something. And this is where he gets his special tempad. More on that tempad later, by the way. We need to talk about that tempad, but he freezes Sylvie in this moment, meaning that I guess he could have done this in the first place, but again, as he kind of says, it's reincarnation, baby, it still would have kind of ended up at the point we're at now when Loki time slipped. It's a bit timey-wimey, if you try and scrutinize the logic of it all. So this is where we get a bit of flexing from He Who Remains, and he's like, who do you think paved this road? But I love the way the episode did this next bit. It kind of reminds me of when Loki said hello to himself in the other episode, and then he was the Loki who was reading out of the guidebook, and then he looks back at himself from just a different perspective. The conversation initially makes us think that this is the first time that Loki has had this conversation with He Who Remains, but it turns out that he did learn also how to freeze time, and this isn't the first time he's had this very moment and scene with He Who Remains. He was puppeteering the puppet master, who was kind of flexing before that, and it's like, oh, well, boom, I did actually learn. So this is where we kind of get a bit of an information dump on some things from He Who Remains as well, and he reveals that the temporal loom is actually a failsafe. And that's because when the loom basically overloads with branches, it will delete the ones that aren't supposed to be there, deleting everything except that of the sacred timelines. He does say that it makes the TVA collateral though, but he's like, well, it doesn't really matter if that gets destroyed. We can just rebuild the TVA again. But the reason why Loki in the steps after this, even though he is contemplating keeping the sacred timeline, he still doesn't want the loom to melt down because it would still mean the destruction of the TVA and all of his friends like Mobius, Sylvie, Hunter B-15, OB, you name it. And so this is where Loki looks at the equation on the board, and and says, okay, I'll just change the equation. I'll break the loom, because that way, not only will, I guess, all the branches survive, but the TVA survives. But this is where He Who Remains just does point out something fairly obvious, and the huge conundrum that we're dealing with, I guess, in the MCU right now. And that's, if Loki does that, then you truly do bring about the potential of the multiversal war. So he leaves a hard choice to Loki here, and he's like, break the loom and you cause a war that kills us all, or kill Sylvie and we protect what we can. And I do like this, because as powerful and as all-seeing, I guess, as He Who Remains is, he has just been sitting in the back seat this whole time, whether he's dead or alive, if you think about it. Because as he mentioned here, despite all of the events we've seen all season long, he's known that it wouldn't have lasted too long for Loki and crew anyway, because the loom is a failsafe. They would keep trying to fix it, but ultimately, He Who Remains would have known the kind of simple thing of, well, there isn't a throughput multiplier that can account for an infinitely expanding branch situation, so they were never going to save the temporal loom from overloading. He knew that when it would eventually overload, it would destroy every other branch and just keep the sacred timeline. And then everything, I guess, would be back to normal, other than he would have to rebuild a new TVA. So now it's really just up to the main character now of Loki. What is he going to do? Well, that is what Loki now needs to decide. So when he's having a hard time figuring out what to do, he chooses to go back to the time theater when he was a prisoner with Mobius in season 1. And this was some nice nostalgia. And he asks Mobius, how do you choose between who lives and who dies? And Mobius tells him a story about a variant who caused 5,000 deaths that were not a part of the proper flow of time. And they sent hunters there, but the thing is, the boy who inadvertently caused all of these deaths was only 8 years old. And this particular hunter hesitated pruning, and where he's never hesitated before, and that's when his partner stepped in. But a couple of hunters as a result died because of that one hunter who lost sight, as he puts it, of the big picture. And you've got to keep the big picture in mind, which really only kind of puts more pressure on Loki to be like, damn, that is the approach of He Who Remains. He's thinking about that big picture. Sure, it sucks with the 8-year-old boy analogy here. You know, you don't want to do that. But as He Who Remains kind of says at the same time, at least this way, you prevent the war, in where basically if you went with the war option and you went with free will for everyone and, you know, infinitely expanding branches, you're going to have infinitely expanding Kangs who would just end with basically nothing and no sacred timeline left. So it does seem at this point for Loki, it is maybe a straightforward decision, but the thing is, how do you live with that burden? Which is where we had Mobius say scar tissue. It's just most purpose is more burden than glory. There's no comfort. You just choose your burden there. And what I also really liked about this story is that this particular hunter happened to be Mobius, I guess, quite some time ago, and his partner was, of course, Ravonna Renslayer. And I wonder if Renslayer didn't really hesitate as his partner at the time to prune the 8-year-old kid because of what happened with her in the past. If you guys remember with the younger Sylvie, because Sylvie stole her tempad and got away and caused all of that hassle for the TVA, and the TVA kept pursuing her to Apocalypse after Apocalypse. She was like, well, I'm not going through that again. You're gonna die, boy. And up next, Loki needs advice from someone else. How about another version of himself? And so he goes back to the moment in where Sylvie was about to spaghettify, and he reveals to her that he controlled his time slipping. He reveals to her everything that he's learned, and she just phrases it on the other side of things compared to what Mobius said with his analogy. Do you really want to be the god who takes away everyone's free will? But at this point, with the way the logic's flowing, as Loki says, what good is free will if everyone is dead? And that would imply, obviously, the Kang War. But that's when Sylvie says, but the thing is, who are you to say if we can't die trying? Who are you to decide we can't die fighting? And that's a very good point. Like, you could ensure the safety through just the sacred timeline, or yes, you could let an infinite amount of Kangs spawn through destroying the loom, as he does go on to do, and at least people have a choice to basically die trying to fight Kang, even though it seems like the odds are incredibly against them, and that Kangs will probably destroy everything, as He Who Remains warns them about. You never know, there's a small chance that they might pull through, and if there's a chance, then they may as well. well try, right? So Loki goes back to the temporal room right before Victor goes out, and he just looks at them all, knowing that this could very well be the last time he looks at them, or at least for a very, very long time. And he goes out onto the walkway. And he doesn't even suit up, and I'm guessing this is just because he knows that he can take the temporal radiation because, that may sound like a stupid decision to make, but he is a god still. I mean, think about how powerful Thor is. It's the same thing. I mean, I guess he didn't know it for an absolute guarantee, so it would have been pretty funny if he went out there. Maybe not so funny, but kind of funny. If he went out there and he just, like, the same thing that happened to Victor Timon, he would just hear a scream from Loki and then end of show. Just credits start rolling. And this is where his clothes start stripping away, and what we see come out of that is a very, very awesome Loki look. But pay attention to the horns there. It does look like the same material of a certain other thing we were talking about earlier. And this really might not be anything, but I feel like it could project into the future. This is where he uses his magic to destroy the temporal loom. So all of the branches of the timelines that are in there, and I know there's a bit of a debate right now as well with, are these technically other universes or timelines, but technically maybe they are the same thing within the MCU, especially with Mobius talking about a Kang from, or He Who Remains variant from 616 at the end of the episode. So that does imply, yes, different universes, just for anyone who was thinking about that. But anyway, he destroys the loom that's housing all of the freaking branches, and that's when the whole place just gets covered in like a web of dying branches. Now, I'm guessing what happened here is that even though Loki destroyed the temporal loom, maybe there was still a wave that still enacted what He Who Remains said that it would do as the failsafe. It's meant to destroy every other branch except the sacred timeline. And so, obviously, when he tore it apart with his Loki magic, you saw all of these, like, rotten black-looking branches. So I'm guessing that's what happened to all of these other branches. It just activated the failsafe anyway. I mean, otherwise, why else would they look so fried in the way that they were? And then Loki kind of uses his magic to grab each one, and it's almost, I guess, like he was resuscitating them with his Loki magic, somewhat enchanting them back to life before obviously sending out that massive ripple. I mean, don't forget, he's infused with timey-wimey, time-slipping, imbued energy, as well as Loki magic, which kind of makes him the perfect dude to do some timeline branch CPR on all of these little roots coming out of, I guess, the infinite multiverse. So that is when we see this massive doorway, this massive tear open to that of the end of time. Sylvie says he's giving us a chance, which is, I guess, to withstand that of the multiversal war and come out on top. And this is where we cut to Loki, going up these stairs. There's a lot of Norse mythology in this, since, this is Loki and there's Thor, Odin. But this particular moment, it somewhat reminded me of going up the stairs to one of the 9 realms of Norse mythology. I mean, obviously it's meant to be like a larger metaphor, I guess, to, he is kind of going into the godhood realm kind of thing. But think, if you play God of War on PlayStation, if you're like going to Jotunheim and you're like walking up the stairs to the gateway, it was kind of like that, if you will, especially with what happens next with the World Tree. But just before that, as he's going up the steps, he's grabbing more and more branches and, I guess, repairing them. He truly is becoming the Loki who remains at the end of time here. I absolutely adore the presentation of this scene. This is something I've said each and every review. The camera work throughout this whole season, just the way that they've done it, like, again, from the very opening scene and the imagination of just coming out of the temporal loom there, to the way that the camera was going up the steps here as Loki grabbed each branch and gave them Loki freaking green magic. I don't know, it's very, very visually pleasing. Say what you will about this show in other areas, I don't know, but this is definitely top marks for me, especially when you just see how all the branches are like coming off him as if it is the cloak that he is wearing. And of course, as he's sat on the throne, he sends one more wave of magic into them to jumpstart the whole infinite multiverse, I guess, of branches, and they all glow green as we zoom out. And I thought it was really, really cool how, I guess, given the opportunity that Loki has here with like holding everything together, he can kind of manipulate, I suppose, what it looks like. And since he is a Norse god, he shapes it in such a way that it depicts the world tree from Norse mythology known as Yggdrasil, which was just awesome. I thought it was so cool. You have the heart of Loki's green in the middle, but then like he did it in such a way in where you started to see the healthy branches blossom on top. There was a bit of blue crackling energy there, I'm probably reaching here, but I saw a little bit of lightning, thundery stuff going on. I don't know if that was meant to symbolize his brother. I thought this was a really, really nice touch in that the MCU and all of its infinite branches is now technically Yggdrasil from that of Norse mythology. It's just a really cool thing, and it makes sense because Loki is at the bloody heart of it. So towards the end of the episode now, as for the after part, so we're at the TVA, and Miss Minutes is there again. And, you know, you had Hunter B-15 be like, oh, she's not going to kill us again. And she, like, did she have, like, a C-3PO mind wipe treatment here? I'm kind of confused. Is this like a different version of her? I don't know if they made that clear. Maybe I'm really being dumb right now and I just didn't pick up on something. But either way, Miss Minutes is there. The TVA, like the whole thing that they're trying to show here is, you know, we see Mobius there. We see like the boardroom, and there's not just like a few judges there or whatever. It's very open. Lots of people working together. So obviously symbolizing that the TVA is a reformed version. You see Mobius looking a bit sad at his desk, and we see that there's a report that he gives to Hunter B-15 about any He Who Remains variants, and he mentions that one of them caused a bit of a ruckus on a 616 adjacent realm. But they handled it, so we're all good for now. So that was obviously, especially if you see the file on screen right now, Ant-Man Quantumania with what happened to the Kang there. So technically the majority of Loki Season 1 and 2 took place kind of roughly right before Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, but by the time we get to this part in the episode, you then see that, oh, they've realized that there is a He Who Remains variant of Kang, and this is what happened to him. And I do like that they showed this, because one thing we haven't really seen since Sylvie killed He Who Remains is that, oh, apparently there's other Kangs out there, but we haven't really seen any evidence of them other than Quantumania. So this is their way of, sure, if you've seen Quantumania, you already know about it, but bringing it into how there are Kangs that are, you know, causing a bit of a ruckus out there in the multiverse, and that multiversal war is coming. Of course, the whole subplot with Mobius that's been cooking all season long, of him actually taking a peek on what his life was, comes to fruition because he's leaving the TVA. Even in a couple of scenes time, we see him standing there looking at the life that I guess, you know, he was taken from in a sense, because he is a variant. We even have Sylvie rock up as well, and he's just somewhat taking it all in, and I wonder what's next for him. Maybe he's gonna, I mean, we will see him again, I'm very sure. We haven't got another season announced right now, but, you know, you have to think we are going to see a continuation of these characters at some point. But maybe he's just going to open up a ski shop nearby. Maybe one that's not too obvious, because it'll be like, hey, why you look like me? My name's Don. What's your name? How come you happen to run a ski shop? Meanwhile, in another scene at the TVA as well, we have OB still working there, and he opens up a bunch of new books, and this is a new version of the TVA guidebook. And the difference this time, on top of it being in different colors, that you see it says written by Ouroboros and Victor Timely. So now there's kind of like one definitive version of that larger meaning of the start and the end of the birth and the life meaning of Ouroboros, and both of them are getting that credit for the book, which I thought was a nice touch. Speaking of Victor, we cut back to him when he was younger, and nothing comes through the window, and I have to admit, I'm going to try and not get nitpicky here, and maybe it doesn't even apply, because I'm not going to pretend to know how some weird time logic could make this work, but, you know, technically, if the book didn't go in and like he didn't grow up to do the stuff that he did, then Loki wouldn't have gone on to get the time slipping powers to then go back and do all of this in the first place. Do you see what I mean? So I don't know. Also, like, shouldn't he still be around? Because don't forget that everyone saw, you know, Hunter B-15, Mobius saw Loki walking into like the little, you know, portal to go to the end of time and become the Loki who remains, and Victor was there. Do you know what I mean? Like, where's the older Victor Timely? That, you know, he's still in that same continuity of where Mobius decided to leave the TVA and where Hunter B-15 was staying on. So do you see what I mean? Like, it's this kind of thing where you're not meant to ask questions. I'm not sure. And then we finally pick up with Renslayer in the void of where she was pruned to. We can't forget that's where people go. And I thought she was going to play a bit of a bigger part of the story this season, I have to admit. She was more just like a, you know, person in the way occasionally. But here in the void, we see the logo of the TVA on the floor, which I guess is just meant to symbolize where it once was. But this is just like the end of time version of where the TVA somewhat once stood. And we hear Elias roaring, and I felt like that was going to happen again. You probably picked up on this in the trailer. It was kind of obvious. You see the glow on her in the trailer, but she seems to be looking at him fiercely. Like, she's not looking at him very afraid. So I don't think this is reaching to say that she's going to somehow, I don't know how she would tame Elias, but this could go on to her controlling Alioth. Or you could say that Alioth might even recognize her, because think about it, you know, she helped Kang win the Multiversal War once before, and Alioth had something to do with that, so he's probably looking at her like, Mum, but she wouldn't recognize him because, of course, her memory was wiped. So how about that? I don't know, but I'm telling you, the way she was looking at him signifies something larger that is going on. And they also lingered on that pyramid in the background in the void. So now this is where there's some wacky theories. You know, there could be a Kang variant. I forget the name right now, but the Kang variant who actually used the pyramid as an HQ, if you will. So she could not only tame Alioth, but there could already be a Kang in the void. One of you guys, I forget the username right now, I do apologize, also suggested to me, what if the Kang at the end of Quantumania, granted, you know, he kind of got sucked away, but like, what if he got sent into the void and he is in the pyramid, and that's the Kang that they're going to use instead of necessarily the one from the source material. I think maybe that's reaching. I do like that theory, but I feel like to continue on with the Kang who got his ass beat at the end of Quantumania, so to speak, wouldn't really show. Let me just say this: I would prefer another version, another more formidable version of Kang, rather than one who's just like, oh hey, like I popped up here in the void. Hey, Renslayer, you know, oh, do you want to tame Alioth together? And then the final scene of the episode, between all of the branches that are covered with Loki's magic, he's just sat there, and it's really tragic because he's just sat there keeping it all going. And what's sad, most sad about all of this, is that he's all alone now, and that's something that he admitted to Sylvie in the last episode in that bar, that he really just didn't want to be alone. So I guess he has his most certainly glorious purpose, but at the end of it, he's alone as a result. So he's not just the god of stories, he's like the god of the frickin' multiverse now. I was thinking if only he could kind of project himself, so while his original body's doing that, he can still appear in the TVA and see his friends, but that would require immense amounts of power from his magic, I'm assuming, and he's probably concentrating enough with all of this green enchanting Loki magic projected onto all of the frickin' branches of the multiverse that he's keeping together. Now, going back to that TemPad talk from earlier, I really felt like maybe more was going to happen with that. And notice how it is made out of the same stuff. It's not only like Loki's throne with the kind of gold streaks, like all veins running through it, so to speak, but also the Loki frickin' horns, his helmet. So some people are theorizing out there. I've seen plenty of theories of people saying that whether this all comes back to He Who Remains, or if this was a part of the original plan that Marvel wanted to go with, and how he still comes back around. I'm not saying it means or guarantees that he's going to defeat Loki, because obviously he doesn't want this multiversal war to happen, so maybe he would go and do that. But the idea being that because Loki has these time-slipping powers, and where he doesn't only time-slip, but he can freeze time. I don't know how this works. This is where the theory starts to disconnect a bit. But maybe his helmet is imbued with that power as well, or He Who Remains fashions something out of it. So I do think it's intentional to an extent. I mean, they both look the same. That would have been very much so intended. They both have the same abilities, but whether that is because He Who Remains got it from some kind of version of this Loki we see at the end at some point in the future or the past, I have no idea. It could just be the fact that they wanted them to look similar, and I'm reading too into it, and other people are as well. Or maybe this does actually factor into the long-term future of what they were going to go for. And I keep phrasing it like what they were going to go for, because there's a lot of talk of, you know, are they going to continue with the whole Kang threat? And there's a lot of people saying at the end of this episode, oh, you know, they set it up in a way in where Kangs can just be, you know, forgotten about, and maybe they could repurpose the story. Now, I'm not saying that they can't repurpose the story to Doctor Doom or something like that, but what I am saying is that I feel like, yes, the TVA have their mandate now of making sure that they try and look out for any Kang variants out there. For example, when Mobius presented the file to Hunter B15 about the Earth 616 adjacent Kang variant, but it doesn't mean that the Kang threat would be completely eliminated. Don't forget that, yeah, the TVA can keep an eye on them, but as He Who Remains says, like, there's too many of them. But it does seem like an impossible task, because Loki's allowing the sacred, I guess what we're calling it now, the sacred world tree, to have an infinite amount of branches, so the TVA surely cannot account for an infinite amount of Kangs, so therefore, inevitably, it should still end up in a multiversal war, hence Kang Dynasty and everything like that. But I guess maybe what people are thinking is that, okay, if they do repurpose the MCU because of the Jonathan Majors stuff, they're just going to blame it on that. Oh, the TVA are keeping track of every Kang variant and they're managing to stop them. Or like, okay, maybe this adjacent Earth has their own heroes who sorted it out, like what happened in Quantumania. And that's good because we didn't have to sort it out. I don't know, but I think that's going to be a bit of a hard sell. So let me know what you think of all of that, what you think they're going to do there. I don't think the episode did close it off unless you really believe that they would quietly sweep it to the side and be like, ah, yes, the TVA are on the forever mission of making sure Kangs don't, I don't know, become multiversal war starters. As for the whole episode, guys, I mean, I think you can tell my thoughts by now. Really, really enjoyed it. I'm not saying it's without its little writing things here and there or nitpicks or plot holes that do pop up, but I think what I would give Loki and what I always say here is that the imagination of this show is fantastic. It is, maybe I'm a bit biased here because I just love what they go for with time and how cosmic things are getting there. And often when you do play with rule sets like that, it does kind of become a bit hard to maintain your sense and cohesion of logic in your universe and to try and be consistent with that. But the awe of it is always what is most distracting for me. And that is the most important thing at the end of the day, is the enjoyment factor. Sure, this is a review at the same time, but everything else that this show decorates itself in with regards to story, especially the cast as well, how fantastic Tom Hiddleston is, the way that this season tackled its cinematography, the score, it's just so exquisite that I think it really does make up for any, I don't know, pitfalls that people imagine Loki to have. And, you know, people must imagine that to be the case because there's been quite a drop-off with the audience this year. And again, as I said, I think at the beginning, I think that's a shame. I think they are missing out. Loki Season 2 is probably the best thing that the MCU has had, in my opinion, in quite a few years. But let me know if you disagree, guys. I've thoroughly enjoyed reviewing it week to week, and let's just see where the story goes because, you know, obviously there is set up for the future. But I could ramble forever, everyone, so let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Like this video if you did enjoy it. Consider subscribing for more Marvel coverage just like this. But until next time, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow tricksters in the next video. Goodbye.